Hey y'all. Before we get started, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who listens. Every view, every subscription, whatever. It means a lot. And if you're not, but you like what I'm doing, then go ahead and subscribe and do whatever you have to with notifications. Because I post every other Friday with brand new short stories, and I would love it if you came to listen. All right, back to your regularly scheduled program. I hope you enjoy. Decisions, an original short story by Charlie C.C. Thomas. The first choice. Garrus blinked the blur from his eyes, groaning as he sat up, leaning back then forward twice like he were drunk until he sat hunched over his legs. He winced at the throb in his head, hands coming up to cradle his skull as he squeezed his eyes, then relaxed them when that only made the pain worse. He breathed as his insides churned, stomach lurching up into his mouth. Then he retched, throwing himself forward onto his hands and knees as yellow bile and water covered the sterile white floor. He heaved twice before the urge died, hanging his head with a whispering groan at the throb in his skull. He hissed through his teeth and slowly slid back onto his heels, crumpling onto his face, then his side, as he covered his eyes and focused on controlling his breath. Eventually, the pain stopped jabbing down his spine, into his guts, and receded to a dull ache behind his eyes. He took his hand away from his face and carefully lifted his head, then pushed himself up to his hip to look around, squinting at the sterile white light from above, vomit somehow gone. He looked around, tracing the square of white floor and ceiling, the walls of glass only visible for the sheen from the fluorescent light, and the endless darkness beyond. He stood, finding himself naked but unharmed, and shuffled until he could touch the glass. There was no shock or rush of pain, only the cold of the space beyond. He gulped at the thought that he might be in space, outer space, and stepped back, whirling around and stumbling as the room tilted. One of his legs buckled and he caught himself on another glass wall, panting at the low ache radiating across his skull to the backs of his eyes. He clenched his jaw and panted, shutting his eyes until the pain had gone and he could look outside again. No, he thought. It's not space. No stars. No planets. No suns. It's just another room. Hey! He slammed his open hand into the glass. What is this? A cone of white light flashed onto the white floor in the darkness, with a creature standing upright in the middle. It was shorter than Garrus, and slim by comparison, its shoulders nearly wide as its hips, head long and slender, the tuft of hair atop its skull short and stiff like it had been shaved. Its skin was pale with a strange reddish undertone despite the blue-purple veins showing through in places. It had two eyes, like Garrus, had what might have been ears and a nose, but they were all in the wrong place. Then it moved its tiny mouth in something that might have been a smile. It approached, light following it, golden pendants glittering beside red stripes in its gray uniform. Its feet were covered in strange shoes that clacked as it walked, but the hands, broad, meaty things, were what captured Garrus's eye. They came together in front of its stomach, Garrus supposed, fingers lacing as it stopped and studied him with its tiny, useless eyes. It spoke, but there was no noise. Then a man's voice came through an intercom somewhere above, in a perfect copy of Garrus's language down to the accent. I've studied this world and your people for a long time. Sorry for the rude awakening in such confined quarters, but my atmosphere isn't compatible with your biology. Too much nitrogen, I hear. The creature paused to let the message play out, then continued. I'll let you in on a secret. I'm not supposed to be here. But that doesn't really matter because your civilization doesn't even know we are here. Haven't done for the better part of 2 centuries now, so let's get on with it. Garrus hissed and threw himself at the glass, beating it with his fists and cursing, spitting as the creature watched him disappointedly, then lifted its meaty palm and moved its fingers like it were pressing buttons. Garrus yelped as electricity shot up his legs, sending him bolt upright, then blasting him back into the opposite wall, where he collapsed. He groaned, pushing himself onto his back as the creature spoke. "I'm pressed for time, so let's continue this without any more interruptions, shall we?" It stared as if waiting for an answer, and continued with a nod. "Good. Now, I'm running an experiment, and you're the latest entry. It's quite a simple thing and not very invasive unless you allow it to be." The thing smirked down at Garrus as he pushed himself up and sat on his heels. "I offer you a choice. You decide. That's it." Garrus furrowed his brows and pushed onto his feet with a gasp and hiss. He approached, careful not to act erratic, and panted, broad shoulders spreading subconsciously as he glared from under his brows. "You make an offer. I make a choice?" The creature waited as, presumably, a translation played for it outside the cell. Then it nodded, slender face suddenly emotionless and beady eyes blank as a machine. "Yes, there will be several choices, and how far you go is up to you." Garrus furrowed his brows, fists balled, but his voice steady. "Explain." The creature listened, then answered. "Let's just get started and you can learn as you go. The first option should be easy, one way or another." The glass flickered to one side and an image appeared. Garrus stepped back to see and swallowed, flicking between the thing and the image of another man in a cell like his, naked and alone and pounding on the glass with tears streaming down his face. There was no sound. "What is this?" Without waiting to listen, the creature spoke, gesturing to the image. "This is real-time footage of another of your species, taken from elsewhere on your planet. You don't know him, but you will determine whether he lives or dies." Garrus went rigid and stalked forward, stopping shy of the glass and glaring, the wall steaming from his breath as he huffed through his teeth. "Release him!" The creature pouted and held up a meaty finger. "First, the choice. Either he lives to continue his part of the experiment as you are now, or you live to do the same. If you choose to let him live, your life will be put into the hands of another, as his is in yours. But there's an 80% likelihood they may choose to kill you to save themselves." Garrus opened his mouth to shout for the man to be freed, but stopped, stepping back with a dry throat and the throb at the base of his skull. Either he lives and is forced to make the same choices like this until it's done, but then I become him, or he dies and I continue without threat of death. The creature nodded, face still emotionless but eyes gleaming and pleased. "More or less. Will you ensure your own survival or trust that others will make the same choice you did and give you your life over their own?" Garrus stared at the man. His wails were silent as he pounded on the glass before leaning on it, sliding down to his knees and crumbling to his hip. His fingers curled on the wall, skinny, like he hadn't eaten for days, his broad frame almost skeletal. "Tick-tock," the creature said with a sideways tilt of its head. "Make the choice, or I'll make the choice for you." It pulled out a broad coin. It might be an antique now, but I find it useful in these scenarios. He gulped and stepped further back, flicking between the other man and the creature. His mind raced. He's skinny, starved, must have been tortured. Maybe he's ill, he thought. He's traumatized. Shouldn't that make me want to help him? But what if I let him live? He's terrified to die, so he might never make the same choice to save someone's life. I'd be condemning several others to die if I let him live. His fists balled as the creature tossed the coin into the air and clicked its tongue, reminding him to hurry. If 80% of people choose to kill the other person, then I'll probably die, and I won't have saved anyone. But if I can live, I can try to minimize the damage. See the least life lost. Maybe you need incentive, the creature said, fingers flitting in a repeating pattern in the air before another window opened. It motioned with its hand, and the footage followed, moving to the opposite side of the wall. There was another man, raging, screaming inside his cell, spitting and kicking at the walls uselessly. If you refuse to make a choice outright, I will not let chance decide your fate. You will be killed for not participating. Like this. The creature gestured to the window of the angry man, and his cell whirred as the ceiling jolted down 5 inches. The man jumped and spun, staring up wide-eyed and silent before the ceiling dropped another 5 inches. The man screamed, but the walls of his cell blocked all the noise. There was only the whir and jolt of the ceiling. The man panicked and fell to his knees, scrambling to the glass to claw and punch and kick. The ceiling jolted down 2 feet and crashed into the man's head. His eyes rolled back as he crumpled to his side, blinking before the ceiling fell another 2 feet and stopped only a foot above his face. He flipped onto his back and pushed against the ceiling with his hands and feet, screaming as the ceiling whirred and slowly began a steady descent. The man's muscles bulged, massive mounds of full throbbing veins, but the ceiling descended with a steady whir as the man's arms and legs cracked and broke under the strain. The man screamed, tears falling as he looked back and yelled at the glass, cursing and spitting until the ceiling reached his chest and kept going. Then his eyes went wide. His ribs broke and stabbed him through, then his pelvis and jaw. Then his skull cracked, and his meat and viscera squished out like paste under the ceiling until the glass was red. Then the ceiling retracted, streaking blood and organs and bits of bone, before the footage paused with a symbol hovering over the image like a watermark. Refuse to participate and suffer that fate. Run out of time, and I'll let fate choose. Hurry now. You've 10 seconds left. He dies, Garrus croaked, eyes still plastered to the paused image of what was left of the angry man, as he swallowed and realized what he'd said. But as his mouth opened to take it back, he couldn't. He couldn't find the strength to say anything. The creature flipped the coin into the air, caught it in one hand, and quirked its eyebrows with a nod. Would you like to know what fate would have dealt you? Garrus didn't answer. Eyes shifting over the other man, now sitting motionless on the floor of his cell, leaning his shoulder against the glass. Fate would have seen him die too. Will it be the same? What? Of course not. The other was a punishment. This one will die instantaneously. The creature pocketed its coin, lifting palm to its mouth. Terminate subject 49-2D. Garrus gulped and subconsciously stepped in front of the screen, eyes blinking as he rested his hands on the glass beneath the footage, heart pounding in his ears as they twitched. He panted, eyes flicking all around, waiting for something to happen. Then a tiny barrel emerged from the ceiling of the cell. The man didn't look up. Something blurred out of the barrel, and the man's head exploded on the glass behind him. Then he slumped onto the ground. The footage ended, and both screens disappeared. I wonder if the choice was easier because it was a fellow male of your species, the creature said, turning and walking into the darkness as the overhead light flicked off. I'll be back. Rest for now. The second choice. What could have been hours later, the cone of light flashed on over the same alien creature, arms swinging as it walked almost up to the glass of Garrus's cell. Hello, subject 307-9Q, the creature said. How are you doing? Well, I trust, given the circumstances. Let me out, Garrus growled, open palms slamming on the glass. Stop that or I'll electrify you again. The creature raised its meaty hand. I'd rather not. It makes these visits so much longer and I'm a busy man. Garrus huffed a bitter laugh. Man. You're no man. Well, I am for my species anyway. Now, your choice. The creature flitted its fingers in the air, and a screen appeared in the glass, following its hand until it locked in the middle of the wall. It was another cell, but twice the size of his, with a mesh divider splitting it in half and keeping the man and woman, both of them naked too, separated. They rose to their feet, looking at screens in their glass walls with Garrus on them. Choose which among these two will die. And yes, it'll be as quick as the
Don't do this!
The woman screamed, cutting off the creature. Garrus jumped at the sound of her voice, broken and desperate. His chest clenched and his mouth fell open.
Please, you don't have to choose.
She wept without tears.
This is my husband. We have a daughter. Please.
Stop, the man said, looking up at the image of Garrus. If you don't make a choice, you'll die. I know you've seen how this thing does it. Make a choice. Choose me.
No!
The woman shrieked, but her husband ignored her. This is our last test. Just pick me. Let my wife live. His eyes were red as tears fell silently down his cheeks, but his voice was steady as stone, fists balled at his sides, trembling from the force of his grip. Why are you doing this? Garrus asked the creature. Doesn't matter why. It'll make you choose. Just say me. The man's voice was more desperate, losing its edge. I was curious if it made a difference between a male and female of your species. Mine exhibits a trait in men to make us more likely to choose another man to kill than a woman, or sacrifice ourselves for a woman's survival. You appear similar in that regard. Don't do this, Garrus said, stepping around the screen to look at the creature. Please, they're innocent people. Just let them go back to their daughter. The creature quirked its head. They've elected to kill more than 500 other participants in the name of returning to their daughter. Interesting, but something that I've already documented well. The creature lifted its hand and readied to flit its fingers into action. Make a choice, or I'll assume you refuse to participate. Garrus threw up his hands and shook his head, blabbering for it to stop before he stepped back and looked between the man and woman on screen. She screamed for him not to kill her husband, weeping, beating the mesh and begging him to come over to her. He only looked up at the screen with hard, wet eyes and hissed for Garrus to do it. Garrus swallowed and whispered, "The man." Then the creature nodded and lifted its hand to its mouth as the man's eyes fluttered shut and he rushed to the mesh, kissing his wife quickly before he pushed away and stood opposite her, telling her to look away. Terminate subject 5-11R, the male. The man shouted for his wife to turn around and, weeping, she did, and fell to the ground against the mesh, hands over her mouth as a small barrel descended from his half of the cell. "I love you," he said shakily. "Tell Onus I love her too. Hug her for me. Every day." Something shot from the barrel, and the man's brains splattered on the glass with a wobble of his head before his knees unlocked and he crumpled like a doll. The woman screamed and whirled around, but the image cut off before Garrus could see her face. The creature nodded to Garrus, tears numbly falling down his face as he stared. Then it turned and walked into the darkness as the light flickered off. I'll be back later. Lots to clean up. The third choice. After a long time, maybe days, Garrus stared into the darkness. Thin hands flat on the floor as it shook with the odd whir and rumble of activity outside in the darkness. But there was still no light. No shifting shapes, no voices. Only the vibration in the floor to tell him something was happening. Then the cone of light appeared around the creature, not 3 strides from Garrus's cell. Garrus jumped back, then peeled up his lips in a hiss, fists balled at his sides as he stared at the tiny, sickly creature standing like it were his better. Subject 307-9Q. It's been a little while. You're thin. That's right. Your species needs to eat frequently. My apologies. I will have something brought down after you make your decision here. It gestured either side itself with both hands palm up, fingers pressing the air like there were buttons before a dozen cubes of light shone in the black, lighting up the floor around them where they encircled Garrus's cell. Inside were men and women, and children, all stripped bare and blinking into the shadows as they studied their neighbors, whirling around to try and see the creature standing before Garrus. At the moment, they cannot hear me nor you, so listen carefully to your options now. It waited as if Garrus would protest, but that would profit nothing. So the creature lowered its hands and continued. You can either choose to kill all 12 of the people around you in the manner of your choosing, or you forfeit, and these 12 will then be given the option to vote whether or not to kill you, and in what way. And if they vote to keep me alive, do we all live? The creature pouted its lips and thought for a moment as the people tried shouting to one another, pounding their glass walls to get the other's attention. No, the creature said. You will choose to kill these 12, or they will choose to kill you, or all of you will be terminated. Garrus nodded and stepped back. Let me think. The creature nodded, hands clasped at its back. Most choose to kill to keep themselves alive. 80%? Even the couple before had killed 500. God. Whether it's fear, self-preservation, or a drive to return to a loved one. Everyone's a killer in the end. Or dead. Subtracting the children, there's 8 people who could vote to kill me. 6 of them are men, so they're more likely to vote me dead, and there's at least one. Subtracting the children, there's 8 people who could vote me dead. 6 of them are men, so they're more likely there's at least a tie. But if all of them vote me dead, then that's the majority. Maybe 12 if the children have been voting for self-preservation. That'll ensure even more people die. Quickly, the creature said. Its face still emotionless, voice empty of smirk or guile, and Garrus wasn't sure if it was from the translator or its actual tone. He shut his eyes, squeezing them tight as he sighed through his nose, and swallowed. Them. Do they live or die? Die. Excellent. Now how? Garrus opened his eyes, wide and damp as his mouth went dry, flesh sticking together. What? I said you would choose the manner of their deaths also. The creature nodded to him with raised eyebrows, waiting expectantly. Garrus looked around at the people, and his chest clenched like he might break apart and suck into himself. His eyes spilled over and his legs wobbled as he shot up an arm to catch himself on the glass, staring at the floor. What's the fastest? You've seen it. Garrus shut his eyes tight and sunk to his knees, throat tight as he forced out the word. That. The creature said nothing. There were no shouts or screams. There were no shots or whirs or whimpers. There was only silence in the dark and the rush of blood in Garrus's ears. Unable to stand the quiet, the unanswered question, he opened his eyes and opened them wider as he sunk further onto his hip and creakily turned his eyes from cell to cell, corpse to corpse. Their blood and brains painted their cells, dripping down the walls as their bodies lay still on the floor, some bent and twisted at odd angles. The creature waited for Garrus to find its face before nodding, eyes pleased but face a mask. Then it turned, the cone of light vanishing, but the light from the cells bathing it in a faint glow as it spoke into its palm. Come, retrieve the bodies from Subject 307-9Q's ward and return them to the planet to be buried by their people after their local customs. Then it looked over its shoulder. I'll be back eventually, and don't worry, I'll have food and water brought down more regularly for you. It wouldn't do to have you die before the experiment's done. The fourth choice. A high, loud noise stabbed Garrus's ears, jolting him awake. He shot up onto his hip, vision blurred as he looked around, body tense and ready for a fight. Then the noise died, and he found the creature standing amid the cone of light beyond his cell in the empty darkness. Garrus slumped, sighing as his eyes slid shut and he pushed himself up to sit slouched over his crossed legs. What do you want? Garrus asked, drearily looking up to the creature again. It quirked its eyebrows with a whisper of a smirk before the face returned to its usual blank expression. "Good morning, Subject 307-9Q. Food and sleep seem to have done you well." Garrus stared up at the thing, face slack on its bones as he waited for the choice to be given. "What should I choose this time?" "Straight to it, then. Excellent." The creature stepped closer and lifted its hand, fingers pressing the air as if there were buttons before a screen appeared off-center, showing him a picture of the world. He stared, then stared past the image to the creature. "Your choice is thus. How many people must die?" His eyebrows shot up before he twisted his mouth into a frown and sat straight, arms tense over his knees. "Across the world?" "Exactly. But you'll have 3 options. There are currently an estimated 11 billion members of your species active on the planet. Did you know that?" It continued without letting him answer, though he wouldn't have. "You must choose between 1,000, 1 million, and 1 million deaths. You'll kill me, I know." He sighed with a sneer. 1,000. You should let me finish. Or, I will choose what number die, and to what severity. If you choose the highest number, they will die a painless, instantaneous death. The second will suffer no more than a sudden natural death, the equivalent of an embolism, I believe. But the third, while the smallest and guaranteed the least loss of life, will suffer a gruesome, slow death over 30 days, akin to aggressive radiation sickness. Radiation? That won't stay contained to the 1,000. It will appear as such, but the cause will not be radiation. I've pre-selected the individuals and infected them with nanites that will destroy them from the inside. They'll likewise cause the deaths of the other 2, should you choose them instead. Garrus glared at the creature for a long moment before he shut his eyes and slouched, hands running down the length of his face. 1 billion painless deaths? He thought. Or 1,000 painful ones. Mercy? Or am I still trying to save as many lives as I can? He sighed, guts twisting as he wiped his mouth and looked away in shame. 1,000. Really? The creature sounded surprised, drawing Garrus's eye, but its face was no different than before. I would have thought you to choose compassion over logic. Perhaps there's more potential in you than I thought. Is it done? Garrus asked. Then the creature lifted both hands and flitted its fingers frantically as the glass walls filled with small screens, each showing an image of someone on the planet. There were people cooking or at work, sitting with their families, in prison, at a dozen different temples and holy places. There were men, women, people of all ages, all classes, all religions. Some he recognized from the media, others he would have never known. Some were in the process of crimes, a few of them disgusting crimes that made Garrus glad to see them go so painfully. I can't fit all 1,000 of them around your cell, but I thought you should see the lives you've doomed. Garrus shut his eyes as the drone of their mixed voices became static. He slumped back to his side and rolled onto his stomach to block the light from his eyes, half curling on himself to try and sleep, while the creature was obscured from view. There are several criminals in this assortment. Tell me, does it bother you to know they'll die because you ordered it? That made his guts twist. He wasn't a murderer. He was just trying to survive and prevent as many deaths along the way as he could. Not the criminals, but the rest. Yes. I'll never forgive myself for the rest. Interesting. Does it please you to know they're going to die an insufferable death because of you? Garrus looked up from over his forearm and found the creature staring at him through the screens like an opaque sheen on the glass. No. The creature tilted its head. You needn't lie. I imagine anyone would derive some pleasure from knowing they killed people they deemed reprehensible. It's a natural survival mechanism. Those who threaten the destruction or destabilization of society are deemed lesser than human, or one's own species anyway. because it makes it easier then for others to ostracize, exile, or even kill them for the betterment of the tribe and continuance of your immediate gene pool. Sir. Another voice came through the translator as the creature's eyes flashed with anger before it fell away, and he lifted his open hand to stretch between mouth and ear. There's an incoming signal from the IDB, marked urgent. Delete it and scrub the records, idiot. I'm almost done here. I can't, sir. It's overlaid with an infiltration code. Either it's opened willingly or it'll broadcast across the whole ship to ensure you hear it. Deletion will see the release of a virus. The creature sighed, shifting its weight onto one foot and turning slightly. Very well. I suppose I should hear what the glorious Interstellar Defense Bureau has to say about the ethics of my actions. Bound to happen eventually, I suppose. The fifth choice. The creature waited, taking its hand from its face and looking partly up at the unseen ceiling. Then a voice boomed, coming through the translator. Captain Reginald Lutherson. Your actions have been questionable for decades across the Delta, but this fascination with underdeveloped civilizations has gone too far. Reports of your self-proclaimed experiments on Faro 4 and its inhabitants break 27 laws on Earth alone, not to mention the other 90 federal of the League. The creature sighed and said something under its breath with a displeased smirk. You are not a scientist or doctor as you fancy yourself. You are to cease these barbaric actions, and since I know you won't, Mr. Mangala, you will be met with extreme force and arrested for breaking the Protected Peoples Act, among a dozen more laws. The other male voice grumbled. Because of you, every government in the Sol system is trying to keep us from going to war with 3 different interstellar governments. End transmission, the creature said into its palm, then turned back to Garrus and swiped its hand out like parting curtains, banishing the videos of the people he sentenced to death. Humanity has been ruled by morality far longer than it should, the creature mused. Mine is a weak race, driven by law and conduct with no appreciation for the bloodshed necessary for progress. It sighed and gestured to something above tiredly before its hands fell. But it seems I'm out of time. The IDB will likely be launching a small fleet to deal with my experimentation. Likely, they'll uplift your civilization and make you honorary members of the Interplanetary Constitutional League, so they can try me back home instead of shipping me off to the Arnosset Confederacy. That would see me turned into an actual scientist, probably. It sighed and shook its head, hands on slender hips, as it approached the glass. At any rate, it seems I'm even more pressed for time than before. No time to dwell on the suffering you caused that 1,000. Quickly, invent a means to destroy your entire civilization, or I'll sterilize the surface of your planet with enough gamma radiation to bathe the mantle. Garrus stood, half dazed, half confused, and open-mouthed. What? You want me to destroy my entire people? The creature rolled its eyes and moved its fingers. Electricity shot up the floor and sent Garrus flying backward, crashing into the glass wall hard enough that it should have cracked. It didn't. Pay attention. Imagine a way to dismantle your civilization. I don't care if it kills anyone, just imagine it, and I'll do it. Or I'll make sure every single thing on that planet is dead and you'll be the last of your species. It clapped its hands. Quickly! Garrus groaned, pushing himself onto his side, then gasping at the stinging pain in his shoulder. He looked down and found it dislocated, gripping it with his good arm as he rolled onto his back, trying to focus on breathing and the creature's words simultaneously. What kills the least? He thought, then said aloud. What can your technology do? What can't it do? Arrogance. Garrus cursed, then forced himself to sit up, eyes flitting across the floor, then crawling up the creature's legs. You said something about nanites. The creature nodded. Can they dismantle inorganic structures? The creature nodded again. Send them down, and tell them to search out all active electrical technology on the surface, and to dismantle it. It'll send my planet back to the Stone Age in a day. Iron Age, but yes, very well. Not so imaginative, but the added chaos might give the IDB something to deal with other than me. That and fishing you and the rest out of space. It brought its hand to its mouth. Eject all live cells now, then disperse swarm to the surface with orders to consume active technology."
"Yes, sir. Done."
The creature turned as something whirred and hissed from the ceiling. "I hope you survive. It'd be a shame to lose such an inspirational creature like you." Then his cell shot up, pressing Garrus into the floor flat on his back with so much force it popped his shoulder back into place. He shouted and yelled as layer after layer of gray and black interior whizzed by, smooth and slick. Then he shot out into open blackness with a glaring white light. He blinked against it, still pressed against the floor as his cell traveled through the dark. He turned his head and found the binary suns of his homeworld shining over the planet as he crested by the night side, a billion yellow lights forming the outlines of rivers, coasts, and superhighways. He ground his jaw, screaming curses as he struggled against the force of the ejected cell, hand scraping over the slick floor to reach for his home. He squinted against the suns, tears plummeting down the sides of his face as the cell arched wide around the planet, taking him to the day side with the lush rainforests and grasslands to the north and southward around his planet's largest desert, 2/5 of all the landmasses. Then, as he whimpered, a sparkling cloud swam through the black of space and encircled his home, drawing more tears as it fell, streaming from beyond the floor of his cell, no doubt from the human ship. The clouds sank and spread until they weren't visible anymore. Some parts were slower than others, though, dissolving the hundreds of satellites orbiting the world, and only to fall down with the rest, ignoring the other cells that came around in wide orbits beside him. He tried to breathe normally, as he slowed enough not to be stuck to the floor, though not enough to let him float weightlessly. Part of him wanted his cell to fly into the void and swallow him up for everything he'd done. Part of him wanted to live and carve out a life and hope from the ashes of his world, ashes made by him. Part of him just wanted to lay there and watch as the now invisible cloud made the lights blink out one by one. The planes crumbled and crashed like meteorites and small explosions. Power plants crumbled and sent the whole world into a blanket of black and silence. No doubt radio would be gone soon, and TV, and the internet. All that would be left were books and tablets and the concrete infrastructure of their civilization. "Maybe that'll be enough to start over," he thought. "Surely there's something left behind. Some backup in a bunker somewhere. Every government in the world's too paranoid not to have a plan for something like this. Right?" As he watched millennia of labor and strife be washed away, he imagined the distant screams of those captured in the crumbling buildings and factories, the death cries of those with artificial implants, the whimpering breath of his civilization's death rattle. He wept for them, but he wept for himself.